Welcome back to the Early Weigh-In Podcast. This week for UFC 284, head over to Perth, Australia, where we got two title fights. First up in the co-main event, we got the interim featherweight strap up for grabs, where we see Yair Rodriguez taking on Josh Emmett. And man, in the main event, it is pound for pound number one versus pound for pound number two. We got Alexander Volkanovski moving up, looking to become double champ as he takes on Islam Makhachev. Should be an absolute amazing high-level fight there. Total of 13 for us on the books. Before we get started, do us a quick favor if you don't mind. Like the video, sub to the channel if you haven't before. Let us know in the comments section below who you guys have in the main event. Coming off a very successful night for the pod, man. Almost 9.5 units for us combined. Our reads were on point. A lot of green for you to go over.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll take a look at your card first. Let's see. That Marcin Tybura by decision at plus 180. That seems like a pretty good snag in a fight that was minus 200 to go to decision to even get just one side, and the favorite side on that. I think that was a good hit. And then you cashed both of your under 2.5 rounds for the Fujit Kinoshita fight and the Nakamura Kazama fight. Both of those 1.5 unit hits with some good return on investment. And the last one I want to touch on is the Tyra inside the distance. Yep. Had to lay a little bit of juice for a flyweight to get it done inside the distance, but at minus 1,000, I think it was an absolute steal, and you hit it good right there. You ended up plus 3.63 units and a 31% return on investment. We'll move over to my card. I guess the Spivak inside the distance at minus 155. Derek Lewis, we knew we kind of called him out on being a fraud. In this fight specifically, he was going to get exposed, and he will continue to be a fade 100%. Kind of my saving grace of the night, Sung Young Park versus Sung Juk Choi. Fight doesn't go to the distance, and then Park wins inside the distance. Hit both of those for a unit. Very big sweat. He ended up getting the finish in the third, but it paid off for me. I ended up plus 5.84 units with a 62% return on investment, and that is the second winning week for both sides of the podcast, so we're looking to keep it rolling into this pay-per-view. In our main event for the lightweight strap, Islam Makhachev taking on Alexander Volkanovski. I mean, you said it. Super fun fight between the number 1 pound for pound, number 2 pound for pound. But I'll be the first to tell you that does not necessarily mean that this is going to be a close one, man. Volk coming up a weight class, not against another striker like he has in his past couple with Max or the Korean Zombie. Not a BJJ expert like Ortega, but a fucking Dagestani wrestler, man. The crazy thing is that Volk already has to find clever ways to deal with the size disadvantages in his own weight class. And now moving up, it's just going to be that much more exaggerated. Just, thinking about how we've broken down Volk's fights with Holloway in the past, the size of Holloway has kind of always been a big part of the discussion in breaking down that fight. And Volk is barely winning these fights by the skin of his teeth. Now we have somebody in Islam who has 2 inches of reach on Holloway, has twice as much muscle as Holloway. I think about the last Embedded that I just watched. They show Islam swimming in the ocean, and his back is literally sticking out of the water like a shark fin. He's so much bigger. And, I was telling you earlier, I would be surprised if Islam doesn't go in there, take down Volk on his first attempt, and never allows Volk the opportunity to get back to his feet. Islam, he's not only a master of getting the fight to the mat, but he's also amazing at maintaining control and has this level of patience when he's on the mat that lets him avoid making any mistakes while he's on the ground to allow Volk to try and scramble out of these positions. On top of all that, Volk doesn't even have the luxury of Islam eventually gassing out like Chad Mendez did, The gas tank is there for the full 25 minutes for Islam, and I'm having a very difficult time finding ways that Volk is going to be able to earn the respect and stop the forward pressure of Islam. I could tell you all these different ways where I think this fight might go, but I'll just be honest, I would be dead wrong in my prediction, and I'd count it as a personal loss if the things that I haven't just said don't happen on Saturday.
I'm pretty much with you on the same side of as Islam here. I told you props to Volk for taking this fight. I kind of have this superstition about him. At the fights, I don't think he's really prepared for Islam to call him out after he won the belt. I think he's probably been drinking a little bit at the fights, eager to jump the barrier. A couple days later, it's like, shit, man, we're really doing this thing, And I think it's a very tall task ahead of him here. Volk moving up against Poirier, Gaethje, Oliveira, something, I actually might give him a good chance. I'd absolutely bet on him as a plus 250 dog,
Right.
but, I think it's just someone who's is just on an absolute different level. But both of these guys have been nothing short of spectacular. Combined 33 fight win streak between the two. But I'm pretty much with you on the side of Islam. The skill set's just flat out unstoppable. I don't think there's anybody in this division who's going to be able to stop it. And now you throw in the big size advantage that he's going to have here. And he's becoming a little bit more comfortable on the feet. He dropped Oliveira as well. But Volk is a very good technical striker on the feet. And, I do think the minutes spent there do probably favor Volk a little bit. It's just I don't really see Islam playing around much. I think he could kind of big brother him like we talked about. Volk has Australian national credentials for wrestling. He's got the short stature. He's a real strong guy. I do think we see Islam kind of deviate from the traditional singles, double legs. I think he's going to find the success in the clinch and the double unders and a lot of trips to get him down. And then you talked about the ability to just not let Volk up. I think he's just going to rack up control time until Volk basically just gets desperate and has to find a way to not be safe and work back to his feet. And he's going to find the sub. Myself on the side of Volkanovski, he's kind of been like underappreciated for me. It's kind of taken a little bit to really appreciate what he's put together. I mean, his 22 fight win streak is pretty spectacular. And, you talk about a guy who's undersized for the division, but has developed a whole lot of tools, the jab, the real sharp leg kicks to just disrupt your rhythm. But the leg kicks is another factor that I talk about because I think that's something Islam can really time on some of the takedowns as well. And, if that makes him really hesitant to throw leg kicks, you're taking a massive game a massive little weapon of Volkanovski away. So I keep circling back to, when am I ever going to get a fighter on a 22 fight win streak at plus 250? I just can't do it, man. I think Islam's going to find the takedowns repeatedly until it's time. I referenced the Drew Dober fight to you a lot. I think that's a pretty similar stylistic fight to what Volkanovski's going to bring in. And I think it's just going to be takedown city for Islam. I see it listed at an over 2.5. And I think that's super tricky because I could see, Alexander just like playing it completely safe, not trying to work back to his feet, but just trying to be safe from the sub. But eventually come round 3 and 4, start to get desperate, start to try to make his way back to the feet. And that's when the submission comes. I don't really like any of the totals here, but I'm pretty confident in Islam, man. I've got him as a parlay piece on Saturday. In our co-main event, interim featherweight strap up for grabs where we see Yair Rodriguez taking on Josh Emmett. A little bit of mixed feelings about the fight, if I'm going to be honest with you. Volk is on the same card here. I think you could have very well just made this a number one contender fight for who Volkanovski's going to fight next, And then are these guys really the two next best featherweights in the world? I personally don't really think so. Yair's coming off a loss to Holloway and then an injury or a win by stoppage due to injury. And then with Emmett, last couple been pretty close, like razor close fights. And then the last one with Cater, a lot of people, including myself, think Cater should have got the nod there. With Emmett, man's now 38 years old. He blew out his knee in the Burgos fight, which, an absolute testament to how tough he is, what he's willing to fight through, but 100% worrisome going forward. Yeah, I saw somebody on Twitter say something about a hip injury. I haven't really seen much more other than that, but also a bit worrisome going forward. I don't really like his chances of winning decisions against Yair Rodriguez. I think Yair Rodriguez is just going to have twice the volume, twice the variety of strikes here. I think Josh Emmett's going to be pretty reliant on a finish. And it just being at the footwork, technicality, the big speed advantage, I don't really necessarily see that coming. I think Yair's got twice the sharper striking. Everything comes a whole lot more tighter, straight down the middle versus the winging hooks of Josh Emmett. And like I said, the much wider variety of strikes. Ton of kicks that he throws, I think is going to be a massive factor in this. I think he's going to have the ability to tear Josh's lead leg up, how he's pretty heavy, looking to throw big power on it. I think he's going to be able to throw those kicks to the body, and I think he's going to be able to throw those kicks up top, which is just going to keep Josh's boxing. It's going to keep Josh's hands up. It's going to keep him from letting his hands go. The taller, younger fighter here, Yair's only got a 1-inch reach advantage, but I think the way he fights, that's going to look like a whole lot more pronounced than just 1 inch here. Emmett, I just think if he's willing to mix it up, maybe he stands a better chance. But if he's just going to stand right here in front of Yair, I think his chances of winning this fight are pretty slim. Pretty big on Yair. I got 2 units on him at minus 160. Got any thoughts on the co-main?
Yeah, man, I'll be honest with you. It's hard for me to break this down without any bias. I've never been a fan of Yair, and I think it's because he's pulled out of both the Zabit fights he was scheduled for. But I will admit that he's managed to stay at the top of the division for longer than I thought he would, and maybe it's because of fluky injuries or that he takes a year layoff between fights. But now he does have another formidable opponent standing across him in Josh Emmett. You touched on him being 38 years old, postponing the surgery, and coming off of, in my opinion, 2 questionable decisions, with the Dan Ige fight included. And sure, Josh Emmett, he throws with that insane power that's decimated people in the past, but since climbing up into the ranks in the top 10s, those KOs just aren't coming the same as they did before. And, usually Josh is the guy with the moments with, the quote-unquote harder strikes like we saw in the Cater fight. And since the UFC judging has shifted the focus on who does more damage instead of who's landing more strikes, Emmett has benefited tremendously in these decisions. That being said, in this fight, I do think he's up against another heavy hitter in Yair, not necessarily heavy-handed like Josh, but you touched on it, the flashy kicks, the athleticism that's caught so many other opponents on the sweet spot. And that's all to say that, I'm not sure that Josh is going to be winning these moments with his power punches when his opponent is, spinning multiple times just to land one kick. It's those type of moments that weigh heavy on a judge whenever they are scoring these round by round. And, I'm not sure if I trust Yair yet in his young career, but he is finally 30 years old and definitely time to prove if he is the real deal at this point in his career. Obviously, he can't help that fluke win against Ortega, but I do need proof of him beating somebody better than Jeremy Stevens for me to actually back him here against somebody like Josh Emmett. Both these guys, they have the style to lead me to believe that somebody is going to be knocked out unconscious, but the stats at the featherweight top 10 fights going the distance are insanely high. We know both these guys have the cardio to go a full 25 minutes. And, I think ultimately I slightly lean Yair. I expect him to land the more memorable shots, but I do expect it to be a pretty close fight. For our third fight on the main card, we see Randy Rude Boy Brown taking on Della Maddalena. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm 0 for 4 against Randy Brown's current streak. I've always thought that he, showed some fraud tendencies, never really liked his willingness to showboat during competitive fights. And I think that we finally have the right guy here in Della to fade him, but it just doesn't look like we have the right price to fade him with Jack sitting at a 3-1 favorite or worse. I think Jack is one of the better prospects in the division, and I do think he'll get his hand raised on Saturday, but I still have a few unanswered questions considering we've only had like one full round of tape study since he's been in the UFC. One thing I do know about him is that he has exceptional boxing and pressure, both of which I think will give Randy problems on the feet. Randy typically does his best work at range where he can utilize that length and athleticism to the fullest extent. For Jack, he does a really good job of flicking out that jab to disrupt the timing of his opponents, and also does a great job at timing that straight left when his opponents decide to throw offense of their own. In this fight, though, where he's at a size disadvantage, I expect him to use that jab more as a feeler just to get closer, close that distance before he looks to land those nasty hooks to the body and to the head. Randy, he's done a great job on this run so far, but I do think he's finally run into somebody who can put him on his back foot, make him pay with that power like Luque did, and I think that Della is gonna finish him on Saturday.
I'm on the same side with you, and I'm glad to see the guy start finally getting a step up in competition in his backyard as well. Talked about him being one of the better prospects right now. The UFC really seems to like the guy, and you really can see why. For Rude Boy, though, kind of a shocking to me. He's making his 15th walk to the UFC to the Octagon. Veteran at this point, fought some high-level names like you said, Luque, Bilal Muhammad. And he does have those good long-range tendencies, a good jab, a good teep kick, knees in the clinch. And if he does get you to the mat, he's real long and lanky. It makes his jiu-jitsu pretty tricky to deal with as well. But, man, Jack, you talked about the boxing. It's just too crisp, man. I mean, I love what I see from him. There's no overextending. Everything's in combination. The way he works the body. The one, just really haven't seen the takedown defense tested against a good wrestler. I'd be one to put, if there was a no takedown clause, I'd really be putting jack up against a whole lot of welterweights, man. I think he's extremely dangerous on the feet, but that is a wrinkle of game in his takedown defense and get up game that we really just haven't seen tested at the highest level yet. I just don't necessarily think Randy's going to be the one to do that here, If I saw a legitimate path to victory for Randy, I might be tempted on this line because it is the highest level fight Jack's been in yet, but Randy has that tall person defense, and he does have the tendency to kind of get backed up and let people get in on his range, and if he lets somebody like Della get in on that range, he's too sharp, man, and I think he's going to touch the chin and finish Randy Brown as well.
For my fight of the night, I went with some 205ers in Tyson Pedro versus Modestas Bukauskas. The UFC is really, really trying to ease Tyson Pedro back into the UFC, man. His last two opponents combined records in the UFC, mind you, 25-18, man. Now they're in Tyson Pedro's backyard in Australia, have called none other than the recipient of one of the nastiest leg kick finishes I've ever seen to date in Modestas Bukauskas. And, in Modestas' defense, he did take that year off to recover, went right back to the place that got him to the big show in Cage Warriors, and got 2 back-to-back wins in under 2 months to get him another shot in the UFC. But they've called him up against who I think they're trying to showcase in this fight, Tyson Pedro. I do think that this is going to be closer than a lot of the takes that I've seen online. And that's mostly because I'm not entirely sold on Pedro, and I think that he still has some things to prove after suffering the back-to-back losses to OSP and to Shogun. Just looking down at Tyson's career, he's never had a win outside of the first round. He is just one of these fighters that makes a great nail, or makes a great hammer, is not a good nail at all. Now the question is whether or not Modestas is a nail. And he has a history of it, man. He sure does. 3 first-round losses on his record, and he's only 28 years old coming into this fight. That being said, he does have decent footwork, and if his team has done any tape on Tyson, I'm sure they understand that the longer that they can drag this fight out, the more likely Modestas has to get this W. Unlike Tyson Pedro, Modestas has had multiple decision wins on his record, and his last win was a 4th-round finish. Looking down at both these guys' careers, they're both capable finishers and both capable of getting finished. In their 30 combined fights, 22 of those have ended inside the the 1.5 round mark. Finally, I think Tyson is going to come in strong, impose his will using that size advantage and riding the adrenaline rush that has gotten him all the other W's on his record. If he isn't able to find that finish early, I do think that we're going to have a seriously good fight on our hands, with Modestas being more than willing to engage with people. He just has to not telegraph any kicks, get knocked out like that Crute fight.
Pedro, one of the more difficult guys to cap. Like you said, he'll go out there and finish Paul Craig and Khalil Roundtree with ease in round 1, and then follow that up by getting finished by Shogun and OSP. And then to throw in the mix, you talk about a guy who's never won a fight outside of round 1. It's tricky. And then the opponents in general, even from the losses to OSP and Shogun, are very, very generous. Ike Villanueva and Harry Hunsucker, that's as bad as it gets, man. That's truly awful. And then again, you talked about Modestas. Got to give him the props where it's due for fighting his way back to it. He just fought on December 31st, got that 4th round finish, so I do expect him to be in some good shape. That's a championship round finish. To his defense, he's already made a UFC debut before. Maybe the jitters aren't the same. And for a guy who's really trying to claw his way back, I do follow him on social media, and he's been very vocal about he will make his way back here. So I think he's gonna come try to give him a tough fight for as long as it does last. He does have that very wide stance, and I think Pedro has a very good calf kick and is going to have potential to chew that up. And he's a very fast starter. I think he's going to jump on Modestas and probably finish him under that 1.5 rounds. But let's say it does hit the over 1.5, man. I do think you're looking at a very good live betting spot, a live potential spot on Modestas Bukauskas. I'm not going to call Pedro that apple pie shitter of the week, man, but I don't necessarily really have any I'm not comfortable parlaying Pedro by no means whatsoever. We talked about not winning a fight outside of round 1, just the silly losses that haven't aged well, and he's had an opponent swap up late as well, so he went from a massive favorite to now only still a big favorite, but nowhere near the favorite that he once was. So it's a much closer fight than he typically had on his hands. I don't know, man. Good fight to cap. I do not think it sees the judges. Good one. For my pick of fight of the night, I'm going to go with Jimmy Crute versus Alonzo Menifield. It is one of my favorite fights, and picks for a fight to not see the judges, man. You got only 6 times in their combined 31 fights have these guys seen the scorecards. And then another thing that jumped off the page right off the bat, you got Jimmy Crute here, who's on the 2-fight losing streak, coming in here to Alonzo, who's on a 2-fight winning streak. And, Crute's a minus 200 favorite. After breaking down the fight, I don't necessarily know how much value is left on Crute at minus 200, but I do think Crute's the right side. I think with a couple more clear ways to win this fight. His last 2 losses, it's to the now current light heavyweight champ Jamal Hill, and then the one previously to Anthony Lionheart Smith, a fight that he was winning pretty handily until the calf kick incident there. In this fight in particular, Jimmy's 9 years younger, man. He's taller, he's longer. I think he's a more complete fighter. Hopefully he's worked on his striking, defense, and offense on this time off. I think he's going to be a little bit faster than Zoe, and a massive, very talented grappler, good wrestler, good submission threat. And I think that's going to be the massive, clearest advantage that he's going to have in this fight. I hope he goes to it early. I think it takes Menifield's chances of winning this fight and kind of throws him out the window. I think that's just going to wear on him, tire him down. But the fight IQ of Jimmy Crute has been a little bit of a concern lately, and something I'm not willing to kind of lay minus 200 to see, But with Menifield, he's kind of like KO or bust, but doesn't really have that many KOs, I guess, for being his style. I don't know, man. I just don't really see another way he wins this fight other than a Hail Mary KO. His skill set's super limited. I was shocked to see he's already 35 years old. I think OSP showed us he's a little undersized for the division. And when you look at who this guy is, how he has wins over Fabio Charant, Vinicius Morea, a 40-year-old Ed Herman, the fraud Morozov. Yeah. But Paul Craig and Serkinov, I guess, are decent wins, but also 2 guys who are just kind of old and no chins, and something Menifield can capitalize on. The takedown defense could be good early, being so strong for Menifield, the stature that he has. But I think Crute eventually gets it. I think Crute eventually wears on him and finishes him minus 110. Sounds a whole lot better than minus 200, but a great violent spot for a fight doesn't go the distance. Who do you have coming out on top?
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it, and it's almost up to Jimmy Crute how this fight plays out. If he wants to stand and engage on the feet, it's anybody's match. But if he does utilize his grappling, I do think that he has a clear edge there. And coming off of these 2 losses, I got to imagine that he's looking for the easiest way to find a W here. And so if he goes to that, I'm with you. He should be the rightful favorite, although it is odd to see that the odds, him coming off of a two fight losing streak, that he's this big of a favorite. If he does find the win, I do expect it to be inside the distance, and it's a much better price tag than his current money line. For my fighter to watch, I just couldn't help myself. I chose Loma Lookboonmee, man. I don't know, I don't have a crush on her or anything, but I do think that she's cute or something. I'm just drawn to her for some reason. I've put her in a parlay, and I think she's in a perfect spot to finally get a finish in her UFC career. This is the easiest opponent I think that she's had, and somebody who doesn't have any type of threat to take her down and get her off her game. Right. Coming from Thailand, being a Muay Thai practitioner, Loma looks to get into the clinch, land those elbows, and if this is just a pure striking match, I think that she has all of the advantages she needs to look like a minus 300 in there. Which is why I'm comfortable doing it. If Elise Reed offered anything to make me worried that Loma would be off her game plan, I would have pause for concern, but I just don't. I don't see it here. So Loma being in this position where she is a heavy favorite, even though she's had some ups and downs in her UFC career, I think it's important for her to get this win to kind of solidify that she's not just some jobber in the 115-pound division, which is why she's my fighter to watch this week.
Elise Reed's takedown wrestling game in general is trash. I think Loma's in a great spot to win. Fighter to watch for myself, going to go with Klidson Rodriguez, another guy I think is in a great spot to win. I do. That is my second leg to the parlay with Islam Makhachev. I think he was a very bright prospect coming off the Contender Series who proceeds to drop a close split decision in his debut, and the UFC has kind of put him on back in the right spot to get back on track here. He's an extremely talented Muay Thai artist himself. I mean, it's just like one of the clear advantages on the entire card here on the feet. He's got a ton of kicks, man. Younger, faster, nasty ground and pound. Just got a ridiculous amount of finishing upside here. When you look at his opponent in Shannon Ross, how the hell did this guy even get this fight? You know, it's a guy who's lost 5 times on the regional scene, a guy who just got finished in his last fight on the Contender Series. I give it to him. You know, he's tough as nails. He is from Australia, but again, I think it is just a spot for Clutson to get back on track. I think he's got Ross covered everywhere, going to put him away. And Clutson Rodriguez and your boy here were born on the exact same day, the exact same year and everything. So, fighter this week, going to be Clutson Rodriguez.
All right, for my underdog of the week, I've picked a fan favorite in Parker Porter, man. I've seen a lot of people jumped on him early, and I think, I got him at plus 122. I think that line I'm much more comfortable laying than what he's currently sitting at, but he's still a dog. I've seen people have a lot of conviction talking about how this is Justin Tafa's fight. If you want to lay juice on the 6-foot-tall fatty fight, be my guest, bro. But this is absolutely a spot where you just take the guy who's plus money and just have fun. We're here to gamble at the end of the day, and I do like the fact that you could get the plus money on what I see as kind of a 50-50 fight. But there's some other statistics to back up why I like the Porter side. I mean, the volume is so clear in Parker Porter's advantage. He has more experience. Tafa, nothing about him impresses me whenever I watch tape on him. He's got knockout power, and he leaves himself exposed quite a bit when he's trying to land that knockout power. Parker Porter, I think my biggest drawback on him is he can get caught. At the end of the day, he can get caught. That being said, I do think if this fight plays out 100 times, we're going to see Parker Porter win 51 of them. Yeah. And I got plus 122, and we're gambling on this podcast.
Amen. I like Parker Porter in this one as well. Tafa uses all that weight to stand there and strike. Porter uses all that weight to put your ass on the fence and make you carry that weight, man. And he's got a good gas tank to be that big. I don't think Tafa's gas tank is near as good. And to make him carry all that weight, dude, I like Parker Porter as well, man. Underdog for your boy, I'm going to go with Blake Builder. Shane Young has been a fade for me a couple times in the past. I want to shout out Gordo Gambles for kind of putting me on this one early and taking a deeper look into this one. Bit of a clash of styles here. Blake, I think, holds a clear advantage in the grappling and should probably look to get this fight down to the mat early if he can. The guy's tough as hell. On one of the regional scene fights, he gets dropped a couple times and is able to still keep his wits about him, man, and still come back to finish the fight. It's what you like to see if a guy to face adversity before he gets to the UFC, still come back. He's got power in his hands. He can be a little bit of a slow starter, but it's almost a bit of patience that you like to see out of a fighter with only 7 fights as well. And when he does get you hurt, man, the way he was able to take Alex Morgan's back on the Contender Series immediately was very, very slick. I think Young has the edge on the feet, but his volume really isn't there. I don't really think the skill set's there. I've not really been impressed with Shane Young whatsoever with his wins over UFC washouts. I'm going to lean with the value being on the newcomer here with just, I think, the better overall game, the ability to win minutes on both the feet and on the mat. My one concern, it is a UFC debut. He does have a long flight over to Australia. He's relatively inexperienced with just 7 fights, and it's a pretty low-level fight to begin with that I don't know how much action I want. So I don't really hate passing on the fight altogether, but I think Young is 100% beatable by anybody that the UFC is going to bring onto their roster. So I think it's dog or pass. Maybe cash me a dog ticket, second fight of the night.
Yeah, and if you hold out, it looks like that line's only going to increase as the week gets on. So maybe if it hits that right number, you could play him. For my prop to watch, I am picking Makhachev wins inside the distance, minus 110. I talked him up pretty good on our breakdown, so I better have some money back in that. I do think that Makhachev wins with ease. I think he goes in there, does what he wants to. Volk, and I think he's respectful enough to try not to hurt him too bad. I think he's going to make it quick and just a nice little tap. Volk can remain unscathed and go back and try and defend his featherweight title. But I do think that this will be Islam all night, so him inside the distance.
Yeah, I texted you, 2 hours ago with a screenshot of this exact play, and then you follow back with a screenshot betting it at 4:30 earlier in the day. I think that's a great play, man. The fact that you get all 5 rounds is even better because, like I told you, I think Volk could play it safe early, but then he's just cut to the point where he's like, all right, I've got to do something. I can't accept bottom position, and then he's going to make a mistake and get subbed. So I think that sub could come later in the fight. I think that's a phenomenal play. Clifton Rodriguez inside the distance for my prop. He's some like minus 350 favorite. You can get him inside the distance on Bet Online for plus 165 right now. I already touched on him as my fighter to watch. I've got him parlayed with Islam, so pretty much my second biggest confident, fighter here on the card. I'm expecting a pretty one-sided fight. Fully expect him to finish Shannon Ross, who walks forward pretty recklessly and doesn't have the chin to really back it up. The guy's 34 years old in May. He was dropped 3 times before getting finished on the Contender Series by a lesser striker, in my opinion. He's been finished in his last 2. Man, I just think Clifton's just way too much for this guy. Plus 165 inside the distance, I think is phenomenal price tag.
For my best bet, I am going with the under 1.5 rounds for the Modestas Bukauskas Tyson Pedro fight. It's sitting at plus money. You can get it above plus 115 or better. Yeah. I give it the okay. Both these guys combined 30 fights, and 22 of them have hit that under. I'm not sure the percentages, but I know that that's plus EV at these odds right here. So I do think that plus 1.5. With Bukauskas coming back, wanting to make an impact on the UFC, he's got to convince him to keep him here. And Tyson Pedro never having a win outside of the first round, I do think it's a recipe for some violence, and it's a spot that I really like this week.
Yeah, you've got, like you said, Pedro, who's a massive favorite, the one the UFC looks to probably going to highlight here. Never won a fight outside of round 1, and you're getting plus money on under 1.5. Excellent play, man. Best bet for me, I'm going to go with Malarkey versus Prado under 2.5 that I got at minus 150. Got in a little late. Props to you if you got that minus 130. I think it's good all the way up to like 70%, man. I would play this at a very high number. Their fights finish at a combined 88% odds or 88% rate, and minus 150 is what, 60%, so looking at a 28% edge right there. I love violence in this fight. You got only 4 of Malarkey's 20 pro fights that have seen the scorecards, and one of those was the all-out slugfest with Brad Riddell, and one of those was the all-out slugfest with Michael Johnson, where he's hurt badly in both fights. And Prado, never been to see the scorecards on all 11 of his professional fights here. Malarkey's a guy who's known for not really having the highest of fight IQ, tends to keep his head on the center line, big defensive liability, and he's live for any newcomer who's going to come out the gates hot to knock him out. But if he does survive that early storm of Prado, I think the gas tank of Prado is going to quickly deplete Malarkey's forward pressure and grappling. Really going to start to take over this fight late in round 1, round 2. That size, experience, and overall grappling edge, it's going to get Malarkey the win here, in my opinion. But all the makings for an under 2.5 to hit.
Moving on to our quick pick section of the podcast, we start off in what Tapology saying 145, where we see Zubair Tukhugov taking on Elvis Brenner. I've got Tukhugov in a parlay. I think you do as well. I think he wins this rather easily on Saturday.
I'm with you as well. I have seen some speculation out there of it being at 155 because he's supposed to take on Joel Alvarez at 55, but you're right, it does say 145 here, so need to get some clarification, but I do like Zubair all day. Blake Builder taking on Shane Young in men's featherweight. He was my dog this week, so I'm going to go side with the newcomer and Blake Builder to get this done.
I need to give that fight a little bit more of a look through, but I am going to side Shane Young here for the purpose of this part of the podcast. Moving on, we go to the women's strawweight division where we see Loma Lookboonmee taking on Elise Reed. I got Loma as the second anchor to my parlay. I'm pretty big on her, and hopefully she comes through in this spot where she's a heavy favorite and has yet to prove to be a heavy favorite in the UFC so far.
Yeah, I do like Loma Lookboonmee here as well, so she's going to be the pick for me. Men's featherweight, again, we got Jack Jenkins taking on Don Shanis. A fight I hasn't really looked into too much. I don't know too much about the underdog here. It does look like Jack Jenkins might be set up in his home country to win a fight. That's all I really have to say. I'm going to go with Jack Jenkins.
Won't keep you guys any longer. I'm going with Jack Jenkins as well. Moving up to the 155-pound division, Jamie Malarkey versus Francisco Prado. Prado, awesome tape study to watch.
Yeah.
But I do think I'm going to go with Jamie Malarkey here.
Yeah, I got Jamie Malarkey. I'm going to say by round 2 submission, but at under 2.5, man, I think it's a great bet for that fight. Going on, Clifton Rodriguez taking on Shannon Ross. Big on Clinton Rodriguez, man. I think he put Shannon Ross away by TKO on Saturday.
Nice. I'm also on Clinton Rodriguez. Moving up, we go to the men's flyweight featherweight division where we see Joshua Kulabau taking on Melsik Bagdasaryan. I think Melsik is the popular pick, but I'm picking Joshua Kulabau on Saturday.
Underrated banger, to be honest with
Absolutely.
you, you know.
Yeah.
Kulabau's a dog, though, man, you know, and he doesn't take a back step.
Melsik hits real hard.
Whew, and he's a very talented striker, man. That's a tough fight. I think it's line pick him for a reason. Just for the podcast purposes, I'll side opposite of you. I'm going to take Melsik Bagdasaryan. Prelim main event, it looks like Tyson Pedro taking on Modestas Bukauskas. I'm going to go Tyson Pedro to get another round one finish.
Yeah, I'm thinking Tyson Pedro comes out here, makes it look easy. Moving on, Jimmy Crute versus Alonzo Menifield. Oh man, I'll take Crute. Would not be surprised if it went the other way.
Yeah, no bet for me on either side. Another violence play that I love. I'm going to take Crute inside the distance for an official pick. Justin Taffa versus Parker Porter. I think I'm going to side with another dog, man. I think I'm going to go with you, Parker Porter, to just, like I said, lean that weight on him, wear him out, maybe find a takedown or two.
Rack up those strikes.
I like it, man. Parker Porter.
Parker Porter all day, man. I'm on the Porter side as well. As the week goes on, I get less and less convinced, but I am on the Parker Porter side, damn it. All right, the welterweight is our next fight. Randy Brown versus Jack Della Maddalena. I think that this is a closer fight than the odds suggest, but I am on the Jack Della side. I think he melts him with that pressure.
Yeah, pressure in the boxing. Randy has all the tools to keep people at range, but for some reason lets people like Chaos Williams and stuff get on the inside. If Chaos is getting on the inside of you, hurting you, Jack Della's going to get on the inside of you and finish you. Yair Rodriguez taking on Josh Emmett for our interim featherweight belt. A lot of featherweight fights here, man. Hopefully they all don't go the distance. Yeah. I'm going to go Yair Rodriguez. I think he could stop Josh Emmett later in the championship rounds.
Yeah, a little unsure about this one. I'll side with Yair as well. As we talked about, I think he'll just make more of an impression on the judges when it comes down to scoring. Moving on to the main event, Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski. We're both big on Islam Makhachev here. I think he walks through Volkanovski.
Yeah, big on Islam. Islam minus 110 inside the distance. I think so. Phenomenal bet this week. Everybody should be pretty much on Islam here. I think he's the true pound for pound number one. I think he's going to show it to us all on Saturday. I appreciate you guys hanging out with us here as we break down all these fights for you. Hopefully we gave you some good betting spots. Do us a quick favor, like the video, sub to the channel if you haven't, leave a couple comments below. We'll see you next week.
Peace.